The atmosphere in the courtroom was unlike anything the seasoned bailiff had experienced. In his decades of service, journalists huddled in one corner, scribbling notes. Cameras clicked quietly under court rules, and a dense silence clung to the room like mist. It wasn't the high-profile drug raid trial that had everyone so tense. It was the next witness. People craned their necks toward the courtroom doors, and then, with soft footsteps and a curious glance upward, she entered. Ava Marie Halloway, 3 years old, clutching a framed teddy bear under one arm and her mother's hand with the other, walked slowly down the aisle toward the front. Her shoes squeaked with every hesitant step. Her mother, a thin woman with dark circles under her eyes and worry etched into her face, whispered encouraging words, though her voice trembled. The judge, a tall man with graying hair and a reputation for being unshakable, visibly softened when he saw the child. He exchanged a quick glance with both attorneys and gave a subtle nod. This was highly irregular. Toddlers didn't testify, not in criminal court, and certainly not in cases with this much at stake. But Ava wasn't just a witness. She was the witness. The raid had happened 3 months ago in a quiet neighborhood in North Carolina. A multi-agency drug task force had targeted a house suspected of housing methamphetamine and illegal firearms. A warrant was issued. Officers had entered just past midnight, accompanied by a K-9 unit. Flashlights pierced the darkness, orders were shouted, and in the chaos, the presence of children was overlooked until it was too late. It wasn't the raid that had made headlines. It was what came after. Photos of Ava, cradled in the arms of a shaken paramedic, covered in dust and clutching her teddy bear, had gone viral. Public opinion splintered. Was this an unnecessary show of force or a necessary action gone wrong? The department claimed protocol was followed. Civil rights groups filed complaints. The raid team, including the K-9 officer and his dog, Max, were placed under review. And now, here stood Ava, unaware of the firestorm her small figure had ignited. A tiny wooden stool had been placed near the witness stand, and when the judge called her name in a soft voice, "Miss Ava, would you come sit up here for a moment?" She looked to her mother. Her mom gave her hand a squeeze and whispered, "Go on, baby," with surprising confidence for someone so small. Ava let go of her mother and walked up to the stool. An officer held out his hand to help her up, but she shook her head politely and climbed it on her own. Her teddy bear stayed firmly in her arms, as if it, too, were there to testify. "Hi there, Ava," the judge said with a warm smile. "Do you know why you're here today?" Ava looked around the room. Her big brown eyes scanned faces: the stern prosecutor, the sharp-suited defense attorney, the police officer sitting stiffly near the front. But her gaze stopped when it reached the far corner of the room. There, seated beside his handler and wearing a bright blue K-9 vest, was Max. Her eyes lit up. She pointed, a smile spreading across her face. "Doggy," she exclaimed, and the room let out a collective breath it didn't realize it had been holding. The judge leaned forward. "Is that the dog you saw that night?" Ava nodded enthusiastically. "That's him. He was there. He helped me." The defense attorney stood slowly. "Your Honor, may I request?" "Let's just hear her out," the judge interrupted gently. The prosecutor stepped forward, crouching to Ava's eye level. "Can you tell me what happened that night? Sweetie, what do you remember?" Ava thought for a moment, scrunching up her face as if trying to fit the puzzle pieces together. "I was sleeping," she said. Then there were loud bangs, like she clapped her hands hard, making people flinch, and then Ava hugged her bear tighter. Mommy screamed. I cried. But the doggy came. He barked at the bad men. He stayed with me. The room grew silent again. "The bad men?" the prosecutor asked gently. Ava nodded solemnly. "The ones with the black shirts. They shouted lots, but doggy barked louder. He was next to me, like this." She slid off the stool and laid down on the floor, mimicking how Max had curled beside her, his body shielding her from whatever chaos was unfolding nearby. Even the court reporter paused her typing to wipe away a tear. Ava stood back up and looked toward Max again. "He made me not scared." Officer Jennings, Max's handler, blinked hard and placed a hand on the dog's back. Max, always alert, didn't take his eyes off Ava. His ears twitched. In that moment, the narrative began to shift. For weeks, the public had been told that Max had burst into the room barking uncontrollably, further terrifying an already traumatized child. Ava had just painted a different picture, not of a snarling beast, but a guardian, the defense attorney, stood again, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, with respect, this is highly irregular. The child is 3. Her memory cannot be considered reliable testimony. The judge tilted his head, perhaps not in the formal sense, but her clarity is compelling. Let's proceed. And so, in the middle of a courtroom built on facts, laws, and procedures, the raw honesty of a child began to unravel a narrative, woven by adults. Ava Young then, a reminder that, despite everything, she was still just a sleepy toddler far past nap time. The judge smiled. Thank you, Ava. You've been very brave. She beamed and jumped off the stool. Her mother caught her in a tight embrace. As they walked back toward the benches, Ava glanced once more at Max and waved. Max didn't wag his tail. K9s are trained not to, but for just a moment, he tilted his head. Acknowledging her, the courtroom had expected drama. Instead, they got truth, soft-spoken, unexpected, and utterly disarming, and it was only the beginning. The raid wasn't supposed to go like that. Detective Ray Ellison had been on the force for over 15 years. He'd led raids on everything from drug dens to illegal gun operations. But this one, this quiet, middle-class home nestled in a sleepy suburban block, felt off from the beginning. The tip had come through a reliable confidential informant. Packages had been spotted, weapons rumored inside. The urgency was there, no question, but no one had mentioned kids. The team gathered at 11:40 p.m. outside the house. The neighborhood was dark, quiet, porch lights off, windows still. Officer Jennings stood at the front of the tactical line. His partner Max, already geared up in his blue K9 vest, nose twitching, eyes alert. A 12-man unit was assembled. They were briefed, quickly checked radios, loaded gear, and waited for the go signal. At 12:03 a.m., they moved. The front door was breached in one fluid motion, the battering ram slamming into the wood with a thunderous crack. Officers shouted, "Police! Search warrant!" As they flooded into the hallway. Max, expertly trained, surged ahead, nose down, leading them straight toward the kitchen, where drugs were most often hidden. Dust particles filled the air, stirred by boots, movement, and panic. But no one expected what happened next. From the hallway, a woman's scream pierced the air, sharp and terrified. My baby's in there," she yelled. In that instant, time slowed. Detective Ellison cursed under his breath. "Hold your fire," he barked, raising a fist. "Which room?" another officer shouted, but the mother couldn't hear him. She was being restrained by a female officer in the hallway. Her cries turned desperate. That's when Max changed direction. He paused mid-run, nose twitching toward the opposite end of the hallway. Jennings, confused, gave a low whistle, the signal to regroup, but Max didn't listen. He turned sharply and darted left, heading straight for a small room with a half-closed door. Officer Jennings followed instantly. He'd learned long ago that when Max moved like that, something was always there. Inside the room, dimly lit by a glowing nightlight, was Ava. She sat on the floor in the corner, her teddy bear clutched to her chest, eyes wide and unblinking. Her lip quivered as the commotion echoed from beyond the hallway. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply froze, silent, still, and in danger. Max approached carefully. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He slowed to a gentle walk, approaching the girl like a protective older sibling. Then, in one precise movement, he circled her and lay down at her side, ears back, tail still. Jennings arrived seconds later, gun still drawn, but lowered. "We got a child in here," he shouted down the hallway. A young officer, Officer Marquez, came running with a protective blanket, securing the child now. He radioed in, moving past Max slowly. The dog didn't move. He simply kept his body between Ava and the door. Outside the room, the rest of the team was finding drugs, and lots of them, hidden behind the refrigerator, under floorboards, stuffed into cereal boxes. It was a legitimate bust. Guns were discovered in a locked closet. A man in his late 20s had tried to run and had been subdued after a scuffle in the backyard. One of the suspects had even attempted to grab a weapon. From a law enforcement perspective, it was a textbook win. But no one could stop thinking about the girl. After the house was cleared, Ava was escorted out by paramedics, still holding her bear. She reached once for Max as they passed. He tilted his head and let her small hand brush against his fur. That moment, caught on a paramedic's phone camera, would become the image broadcast across news networks the following morning. It didn't take long for the headlines to shift. Drug bust in suburbia. Child found in middle of raid. Canine hero protects toddler during police operation. But not all the press was positive. Critics quickly emerged, questioning why officers didn't know there were children in the home. Was enough recon done? Should the raid have been postponed or conducted differently? Civil rights attorneys called it excessive force. One anchor boldly asked, what if that child had been caught in the crossfire? Jennings, who had already been placed under administrative review alongside the other officers involved, watched. The coverage was silent frustration. He knew Max hadn't just followed training. He had chosen to protect that child, but the K-9 couldn't speak. And the only person who truly saw what happened that night, in that room, in those few crucial seconds, was Ava. Weeks passed. The department launched an internal investigation. The family filed a complaint. The story bounced from screen to screen, opinion to opinion. People on both sides of the political spectrum used the incident to fuel their narratives. And then, one morning, Jennings got the call. They want her to testify. The captain said, the girl, the toddler. Jennings was silent for a long time. She's just a baby. She's the only one who saw Max with her. She's not a formal witness. Not really. But the judge agreed it could help clarify the K-9's conduct. Jennings looked down at Max, who sat at his feet, eyes full of loyalty. He did everything right. He said quietly, I believe you. The captain replied, now let's see if she says the same. And so, 3 months after the night that changed everything, Ava, too young to read, too young to tie her shoes, was brought into court, not because of what she knew, but because of what she remembered. And everyone was about to find out just how powerful a child's memory could be. Officer Jennings had worked with Max for nearly 6 years. In that time, they cleared drug houses, tracked down armed fugitives, and even located a missing child lost in the woods for 2 days. But nothing in their decorated partnership had ever put them under the kind of scrutiny they now faced. One moment Max was hailed as a hero on the evening news, and the next, he was a point of controversy, the center of a legal and public relations nightmare. What should have been a clean operation had turned messy, not because of how it ended, but because of who was in the house when it began. A child, a toddler, a frightened little girl sitting just feet away from the chaos, from weapons, from rest. The court of public opinion didn't wait for facts. On one side, there were citizens praising Max, calling him a guardian, a four-legged shield who had protected a vulnerable child during a violent moment. On the other, critics demanded answers. Why was a child placed in harm's way? Had Max followed protocol? Was the use of a K-9 even appropriate in a household that hadn't been properly vetted for minors? To some, Max was a symbol of bravery. To others, he was a tool of a system that acted first and considered consequences later. It wasn't long before Jennings was summoned to a disciplinary hearing. The room was sterile, a cold white conference room at police headquarters with a long metal table and stiff back chairs. Across from him sat internal affairs officers, a department lawyer, and a civilian observer from the police oversight committee. Max sat by Jennings' side, leashed and quiet, his amber eyes watching everyone in the room. Officer Jennings, one of the investigators, began, flipping through a thick file. Walk us through your actions the night of the raid. In particular, your handling of K-9 Max. Jennings cleared his throat. He had told the story a dozen times now, to his sergeant, to a panel of city lawyers, to the press behind closed doors. But it didn't get easier. We entered the residence at 12:03. Max led the stack, as per our deployment protocol. Upon entry, he signaled interest in the kitchen area, where we later found multiple drug bundles. But partway down the hallway, he diverted. You didn't call him back? No, Jennings replied firmly. Max has been trained to detect more than just narcotics. He made a judgment call, and I trusted it. The woman from the oversight committee narrowed her eyes. So you're saying the dog decided the child was in danger? I'm saying, Jennings said slowly, that Max didn't treat her like a bystander. He treated her like a priority. There was silence for a moment. Another officer leaned in. There's concern about the trauma inflicted on the child, that the dog's presence may have escalated her fear. Jennings gestured gently toward Max. With respect, sir. She didn't react like someone afraid of him. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She held her bear and sat still. Max laid down beside her and guarded her until Officer Marquez came in to extract her. He never barked, never growled, never made a threatening move. I believe he knew she needed protecting. The panel scribbled notes, whispered among themselves. One investigator raised his eyes. We have witnessed testimony from the mother suggesting the dog barked aggressively. She didn't see him in the room, Jennings said. She was restrained in the hallway. Her daughter is the only one who saw what actually happened inside, and she's 3 years old. The civilian observer added flatly, hardly a reliable source. Jennings felt his jaw tighten. That 3-year-old looked him in the eye, Your Honor, and when she saw Max in the courtroom, she called him her protector. That means something, but facts weren't enough. Emotions ran high. Headlines had turned the public against the raid. The mayor's office demanded accountability, and that meant someone, or something, had to answer. The officers were being cleared individually, but Max's role remained murky in the public eye. Even within the department, whispers circulated. Why didn't Max follow command? Should he have been pulled back? Are K-9s out to unpredictable for high-risk entries when children are involved? Jennings knew one thing for certain. Max had done exactly what he was trained to do. But he also did something no one could have taught him. He made a choice. At home, Jennings couldn't help but watch Max differently now. He still gave him the same commands: sit, stay, heel, and Max obeyed without question. But there was something deeper there. After the raid, Max seemed quieter. He would linger near Jennings more than usual, as if sensing the weight of everything that had followed. At night, Jennings would find him sitting by the window, watching the street. You did good, buddy, Jennings whispered one night, patting his head. You did more than good. Max simply leaned into the touch. Meanwhile, Ava's testimony loomed. Her story had sparked renewed attention. She wasn't scheduled to take the stand in a formal sense. The judge had ruled her statements would be heard as supporting narrative, not official evidence. But they would be spoken under oath, in open court, and that meant everything Max had done would either be confirmed or cast into doubt by a child who barely understood what court even meant, and if she changed her story, if the pressure caused her to break down, to panic. Jennings didn't want to think about that. He had risked his badge on a split-second trust in his partner. Now it all came down to a toddler's words. Inside the courtroom, Max would sit beside him again, calm, quiet, waiting, and across from them. The smallest voice in the room would either clear his name or unknowingly condemn him. The K-9 was under fire, but Jennings believed Max had never failed him, and he didn't believe the little girl would either. Courtroom to be was unusually full for a Wednesday morning. Lawyers arranged their notes. Reporters shifted eagerly in their chairs, and an air of uncertainty hung over the room like a held breath. Everyone was waiting for something they'd never seen before, a 3-year-old girl testifying in a criminal case involving a police K-9. Even the judge, typically composed and methodical, adjusted his glasses twice and sipped his coffee. More than usual, children didn't testify in court, not because they couldn't, but because they usually didn't need to. Their stories filtered through psychologists or caregivers. But this case was different. This child had seen something no one else had, and everyone, on both sides of the aisle, had pinned their hopes or fears on what she would say. Ava was brought in through a side door to avoid the media. Her small frame peeked out from behind her mother's legs. She wore a yellow sundress, white sneakers with glittering laces, and carried the same scruffy teddy bear she clung to the night of the raid. Her hair had been brushed into pigtails that bounced slightly as she walked, but her eyes, deep and aware, belonged to someone who had seen more than any toddler should. The courtroom fell still. Officer Jennings watched from his seat near the front, Max lying at his feet. The dog remained perfectly still, except for the occasional twitch of an ear. His eyes, though, were locked on Ava. The judge offered a gentle smile. Hello, Ava. Would you like to come sit in the special chair up front? Ava looked up at her mom. Her mother nodded, eyes brimming. The court had arranged a small stool in place of the usual witness box, and the bailiff had removed the intimidating microphone, replacing it with a clip-on mic that rested on Ava's dress. The judge leaned forward slightly. No need to be scared. We just want to ask you a few questions. You can hold your teddy if you like. She nodded and climbed up onto the stool. Swinging her legs slightly, the prosecutor, a calm-voiced woman named Miss Howard, approached first. She crouched so that she was at Ava's level. "Hi, Ava. Do you remember me? We talked last week, remember?" Ava smiled shyly. "You had the sparkly shoes." Everyone chuckled softly. Even the judge smiled. "That's right," Miss Howard said warmly, "and we talked about the night with the loud noises. Do you remember that night?" Ava nodded. "Can you tell me what you were doing before the noises started?" "I was in my room. I was reading to Bear," she said, holding up her stuffed toy. "He was scared of the dark." "I bet you helped him feel better," the attorney said. Ava nodded again, then added quietly, "Until the booms." "What happened when you heard the booms?" Ava's face changed. Her brows furrowed, and her legs stopped swinging. She clutched her bear tighter. "I got scared." Mommy screamed. There were shadows in the hallway, loud men yelling. Miss Howard's voice softened. "Did anyone come into your room?" Ava paused. Then she looked across the room and pointed. "Doggy did." All eyes turned to Max. The judge cleared his throat. "Do you mean that dog, Ava, right there?" She nodded, smiling now. "That's him. He came in my room. He was loud too, but not mean. He barked at the shadows. Then he laid down next to me like this." She slid off the stool and lay on the floor, curling up beside her bear as she'd done the night of the raid. The entire room sat motionless. Officer Jennings lowered his eyes. Even now, months later, the memory of finding Ava curled up with Max like that stirred something deep in him. She had been so still, so quiet, not from shock, but from trust. Miss Howard continued gently. "What did Max do after that?" "He didn't let the shadows come in. He stayed next to me until the other man came. He told me it was okay." "Was Max scary?" Ava shook her head fiercely. "No. He was a good dog. He saved me." Those last 3 words hung in the air like a hymn. Even the defense attorney didn't move. He planned an objection, prepared a motion to have her testimony stricken as unreliable due to age. But now, seeing her on the floor, reenacting a memory not learned but lived, he hesitated. The judge, after a pause, spoke. "Let the record show that the minor witness identified the K-9 officer, Max, and described his actions during the police entry as protective and non-aggressive." Ava got back up and looked toward Max. "Hi, doggy," she whispered. Max's ears perked up, and though he remained perfectly still, his tail tapped the floor once. Just once. The bailiff blinked. Back tears. The defense finally stood, adjusting his tie. "Permission to approach the witness?" The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Keep it brief and respectful." The defense attorney crouched down, speaking slowly. "Hi there, Ava. I just wanted to ask, was the dog loud? Did he scare you at all?" Ava considered this. "He was loud when he barked, but not scary. The men were scarier. He made me feel safe." The attorney sighed, nodded, and stood. No further questions. That was it. Her part was done. The judge smiled gently. "You did a very brave thing today, Ava. You helped us understand what happened." She beamed, hopped off the stool, and ran to her mother, who knelt down to hug her tightly. As they turned to leave, Ava looked back one last time. "Bye-bye, doggy." Max didn't move, but he watched her the whole way out. In that moment, it no longer mattered what legal strategy the defense pursued, or how many hours of policy review followed. A 3-year-old had walked into a courtroom and told the truth in the only way she knew how, and she had done it without fear, because one dog had earned her trust the night it mattered most. The moment Ava's words left her mouth, "He made me feel safe," the courtroom shifted. It wasn't loud, no dramatic gasps, no pounding gavels or raised voices, just a pause, a deep, collective stillness that swept through every person in the room like a quiet tidal wave. The judge, known for his strict adherence to procedure, lowered his pen slowly and glanced over the rim of his glasses at the little girl returning to her. "Mother." She clutched her teddy bear in one hand and her mom's fingers in the other, looking as content as if she just recited her ABCs at preschool. No sign of pressure, no sign of confusion, just truth, spoken without agenda. The jury, though instructed to disregard her words in terms of verdict weight, sat stunned. One juror, a retired elementary teacher, discreetly wiped a tear from her cheek. Another, a veteran, stared ahead in stony silence, lips pressed together, visibly moved. And then there was Max, still lying beside Officer Jennings, his body alert yet calm. He hadn't moved during the entire testimony, but now, as Ava exited, His ears twitched. His head tilted slightly. A single soft breath pushed from his nose as he watched her go. Jennings, hand resting gently on Max's back, felt the subtle change in his partner, as if Max, too, sensed that something important had just happened. On the other side of the room, the prosecution team sat quietly. Miss Howard didn't smile. She didn't turn to gloat or whisper strategy to her colleague. Instead, she looked down at her notes and underlined the words she'd written earlier. Let the child speak. Let her tell her own story. It had been a gamble, a risky, career-shaping choice to bring a 3-year-old into court, not to manipulate, not to perform, but to offer clarity through the only lens that mattered, innocent experience. The defense attorney, Mr. Keller, stood motionless, frozen halfway between his table and the bench. He had rehearsed a dozen different arguments to diminish Ava's impact, her age, her limited vocabulary, her trauma-clouded memory, but none of those rebuttals felt appropriate now, not after watching her curl up on the courtroom floor, mimicking how the dog protected her, not after hearing the simple, clear cadence in her voice as she said, "He stayed next to me." He returned to his seat, face blank. His argument would come later, carefully worded, legally grounded, but the emotional balance in the room had already tilted. Back at the bench, the judge shifted in his seat and looked toward the bailiff. Please note for the record, courtroom remains orderly. Witness Ava Holloway has been dismissed. Next witness will be called after recess. He gavelled once, not with force, but formality. Then he stood and stepped down from the bench, a rare move. Quiet whispers rippled through the room. Court wasn't adjourned yet, but the judge needed a moment. Everyone did. Outside, in the corridor, Ava sat in her mother's lap on a bench near the water fountain. A counselor from the victim's advocacy office offered her a juice box. She took it politely and giggled softly when it made a funny squirt. "Did I do good, Mommy?" she asked, half whispering. Her mother nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "You did perfect, baby. You told the truth. That's all anyone could ask." Inside the courtroom, Officer Jennings remained seated, hand never leaving Max. He felt the pressure of the room change. For weeks, they'd been racing for impact, news stories spinning out of control, angry voices calling for justice, critics demanding someone be held accountable. But now, silence, a heavy, respectful silence. Max let out a soft, low exhale. Not a whine, not a bark, just a slow breath, as if releasing a weight only he had been carrying. Jennings bent down and whispered, "You did it, buddy." She remembered. For the first time in hours, Max shifted. He sat up straighter, ears perked forward, tail gently sweeping the floor like a metronome. He didn't need a medal, didn't need a thank you, but something inside him, instinct, connection, loyalty, had waited for this confirmation. She remembered. At the prosecution's table, Miss Howard finally closed her folder. She looked across the room toward Jennings and Max, gave a nod, then turned her attention to the judge as he returned to the bench. Back on record, the judge said, "Next witness will take the stand after a brief recess. I remind the court, while the minor statements are not to be weighed as formal evidence, they are recorded as part of the case narrative." He paused. "Let it also be noted," he added, his voice soft but resolute, "that the child's demeanor was composed, her statements unsolicited, and her recollection consistent. The court acknowledges her words as sincere. Gasps were suppressed. Pen scribble. Someone in the gallery quietly said, "Wow." The judge tapped the gavel again. 10-minute recess. As people began to rise, whispers returned. Not the agitated, controversial whispers from before, but something more subdued, respectful, thoughtful. Reporters exited quickly, rushing to file headlines. Toddler's testimony silences courtroom. 3-year-old recalls doggy that saved me. Canine officer's fate turned by smallest witness. Jennings remained seated with Max. He didn't move right away. He didn't need to. For the first time since the investigation began, the burden felt lighter. No press release could change the facts. No legal challenge could reshape the moment that had just unfolded. Because when the courtroom froze, when everyone stopped to listen, not as attorneys or officers or officials, but as people, the truth became undeniable. Max hadn't just done his job that night. He had become someone's hero. And now, finally, the world was beginning to see it. It was supposed to be a simple case of procedure, at least. That's how the review board had first seen it. A matter of checklists, timelines. Warrant justification and K-9 deployment protocol. Everything, on paper, had appeared to follow department standards. But then came Ava, her testimony, so innocent, so unscripted, had taken everything clean and clinical and cracked it open like glass. What mattered now wasn't just what was written in the reports, but how a child remembered that night, not through the lens of law, but through the eyes of fear and safety. After court recessed, the energy in the hallway felt like the calm after a thunderstorm. Reporters whispered urgently into phones. Legal clerks stood clustered in doorways, replaying Ava's words in fragments. She said he saved her. She curled up like he did in the room. She didn't hesitate. That kid knew that dog. Inside the judge's chambers, Ms. Howard and her team reviewed the next steps of their case. But even she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had already been decided, not by the law, but by the truth, and truth, when spoken by a child, was impossible to ignore. Across the building, Officer Jennings sat with Max in the lobby of the courthouse's lower level. Away from the crowds, Max rested his head on his paws, tail curled around his side. Jennings leaned back against the wall, hands still resting gently on the dog's back, eyes closed, letting the last few hours settle into his chest like falling dust. Ava had remembered, not just remembered, testified. She hadn't been coached. Her body language, her tone, her reenactment, none of it could have been manufactured. And despite being just 3 years old, she had done what grown adults often failed to do under pressure. She had told the unvarnished truth. No filter, no agenda, just the world exactly as she saw it. She was the only one in that room, besides you, Jennings whispered to Max, who looked up at the sound of his voice. And you did your job, partner. You did more than that. Max didn't need praise, but he blinked slowly in response, the way he always did when he recognized his handler's voice, as if he understood in his own way. That something had shifted. Later that evening, the video from the courtroom leaked online. It wasn't supposed to. Courtroom footage of minors was sealed and protected. But someone had recorded Ava's movements on a phone, and within hours, the clip had gone viral. It wasn't her words that struck people most. It was the visual. The tiny girl standing up from the stool, curling up on the courtroom floor beside her teddy bear, mimicking the position of the dog who had laid by her side. He stayed next to me, she had said. Social media exploded. Hashtag Max the Protector. Trended within the hour. Support flooded in from all over the country. Parents, dog lovers, veterans, survivors of trauma. Celebrities reposted the clip. A well-known child psychologist commented, "We often underestimate how reliable a child's truth can be." She didn't testify like a trained witness. She testified like someone who remembered being safe. By morning, public opinion had shifted dramatically. Where once there had been suspicion and skepticism fueled by aggressive headlines and politically charged commentary, now there was clarity. The narrative was no longer about the raid itself, but about what happened during it. And at the center of it all wasn't a police officer or a legal team or even the judge. It was a child and a dog. Inside the police department, Max's file was reopened. The internal review board, now under pressure from the mayor's office and the public, moved to reevaluate their findings. The claim that Max had aggressively escalated the situation was challenged with Ava's testimony and security camera footage, showing his calm posture and protective positioning. Jennings was called in again, this time, not to defend himself, but to answer a different kind of question. Do you believe your K-9 partner made a conscious decision to shield the child? A board member asked. Jennings didn't even hesitate. Yes, sir. I've been through dozens of raids with Max. He's never deviated from formation unless he sensed something more important than the objective. That night, it wasn't about the drugs or the suspects. It was about the girl. The board nodded slowly. And had you trained him for that? No, not like that. Jennings replied. That was Max's instinct. His choice. It was the kind of answer that couldn't be taught and couldn't be ignored. Back at home, Ava was blissfully unaware of the headlines. Her mother shielded her from the media, turned down every interview request, and unplugged the TV to her. The courtroom was just a big room with lots of seats and a nice dog she'd seen again. She didn't know she'd changed the outcome of a legal case. She just knew she'd told the truth. That night, as she curled up in bed with Bear under her chin, she whispered softly. Doggy was brave. Her mother kissed her forehead. So were you, and in another part of town, Officer Jennings sat on the porch of his home, Max beside him, watching the night settle over the street. The dog's breathing was steady, calm. Jennings smiled. You saved her, not just that night, but today, too. He scratched behind Max's ears. And you did it without ever saying a word. A child had spoken, and a dog had listened, not to commands, but to instinct, to something deeper, something that didn't need translation in a world of cross-examinations and gray lines. Ava's truth had done what few things could. It had cut straight through the noise and reminded everyone that sometimes the purest form of testimony is trust. The morning Max was officially declared a hero, the skies above the North Carolina police station broke into sunlight after 3 days of rain. It felt like a sign. In the weeks since Ava's testimony, momentum had built like a rising tide. The Departmental Review Board, which had initially flagged Max for uncontrolled behavior during the raid, had reversed its recommendation. A full apology was issued to Officer Jennings. Quietly at first, then more publicly once the mayor's office stepped in. But this day was different. This day was for Max, in the police station's courtyard, beneath the proud blue flag of the K-9 Division. Officers, city officials, and local families gathered for the ceremony. Folding chairs lined up beneath a white canopy. Rows of uniforms shimmered under the sun, and at the front stood a single podium. Behind it, a wooden plaque with Max's name engraved in gold. K-9 Max, in honor of exceptional service and protective action in the line of duty. Officer Jennings stood off to the side with Max at his heel. Unlike the courtroom, the dog wasn't restrained by expectation or tension. He wore his polished blue vest and looked out at the crowd with calm eyes, tongue flicking out every now and then. Jennings had brushed his coat that morning, something he usually only did for special calls or school visits. But this was bigger than any call. This was history. Max doesn't care about medals. Jennings had told reporters the day before. He doesn't know he's being honored, but I do. And so does the little girl he protected. The ceremony began with speeches, short, heartfelt ones. The police chief spoke first. In law enforcement, we often talk about bravery in moments of danger. But what K-9 Max showed was not just bravery, it was instinctive compassion. A decision made without orders, without hesitation, to protect the most vulnerable life in the room. Applause followed, some loud, some tearful. Next was Mayor Randall, who had been quiet during the early days of the controversy. Now, standing before the podium, she chose her words carefully. This isn't just about one dog. It's about what he represents. In a time when trust between communities and officers is fragile, Max showed us a model of protection without fear, without failure. He reminded us what it means to serve with honor. She turned and knelt beside Max, who, to everyone's delight, extended his paw as Jennings quietly gave the signal. She smiled, and I think that's worth celebrating. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. Jennings stepped forward, Max beside him. A thick blue and gold ribbon held a custom medallion engraved with Max's name. He clipped it gently round Max's neck and crouched beside him. 6 years I've worked beside this guy, he said to the crowd, his voice thick with pride. And not once has he let me down. But that night, in that room, he didn't just do his job. He did something no training ever taught him. He made a choice, and because of that, a little girl went home safe. The crowd stood in applause. Flashbulbs popped. In the front row, seated with a police social worker and her mother, was Ava, dressed in a light blue dress with white shoes, her teddy bear tucked tightly in her lap. The bear now wore a toy-sized police vest someone from the department had made just for her. When the applause died down, someone handed her a mic. The crowd hushed. She stood slowly, looked at Max, and smiled. "Thank you, doggy," she said, soft and sure. "I love you." That was all. No more words needed. Max, hearing her voice, turned his head and looked at her. His tail wagged once. The social worker wiped her eyes. Ava's mother squeezed her hand. Somewhere in the back, a reporter muttered, "That's the headline." After the ceremony, a line of people formed, officers shaking Jennings' hand, kids asking to pet Max, parents thanking him for his service. A local bakery had made dog-friendly cupcakes, which Max happily devoured beside a new chew toy labeled for the goodest boy. Ava approached quietly, her eyes wide with admiration. Jennings crouched down beside Max and looked at her. "You want to pet him?" She nodded, stepped closer, and reached out. Max, as if sensing the importance, Lay down gently and let her press her hand against his fur. He remembered me, she whispered. Jennings smiled. I think he always will. That night, Max lay sprawled on the rug in Jennings' living room, belly full, eyes half-lidded. His medal hung on the hook near the door beside Jennings' service pin and collar tags. Outside, the neighborhood slept quietly, no sirens, no flashlights, no courtrooms, just peace. Jennings leaned back on the couch, beer in hand, watching. Max breathed, slow, deep, content. It's funny, he said aloud. They gave me medals before, letters, commendations. But this one's yours, and you earn it more than any of us. He paused, took a sip, then added, she called you a hero, Max. She's not wrong. Max shifted in his sleep and let out a soft, rumbling breath. Outside, porch lights flickered off one by one. Inside, a dog rested with the weight of the world finally lifted from his shoulders, not because someone said he was good, but because someone small, someone scared, someone honest, had felt it. Hero, not a title, not a rank, but a truth spoken by the one heart that mattered most. Weeks had passed since the courtroom had fallen silent, since Ava's tiny voice had turned a case upside down. But life, as it always does, kept moving forward. For Ava, the days after the trial were filled with ordinary moments, playground, visits, storytime at the library, ice cream cones with sprinkles melting down her fingers. Yet beneath those simple joys was a quiet strength that had blossomed from an unexpected place. The bond with Max, her mother often found her gazing at. The framed photo on the living room wall, Ava curled up beside Max, both of them looking calm and safe. It was more than a snapshot. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, protection and trust could be found. At school, Ava's teachers noticed a change. The once shy toddler now shared stories about Doggy, who stayed with me, and when other kids asked, she'd smile and say, he's my hero. Her words weren't boastful, just matter of fact, the simple truth of a child who had been cared for when it mattered most. Officer Jennings, meanwhile, found himself in a new rhythm. The department's internal investigation had closed. The allegations against Max were officially dropped, and the K-9 unit had begun using the story as a teaching moment, a reminder that every dog and handler pair could make a difference. Beyond protocol, yet Jennings knew something deeper had changed inside him. The routine calls, the training drills, the long nights of waiting. They now carried a renewed sense of purpose. Max wasn't just a working dog. He was a guardian of innocence, a silent hero in a world often defined by chaos. Their bond grew stronger every day. On patrol, Max stayed close but watchful, eyes scanning streets with quiet intensity. Off duty, he was gentle, patient, and affectionate, especially with Ava, who sometimes stopped by the station to visit with her mother. One afternoon, during a community event hosted at the precinct, Ava and Max shared a moment that stayed with everyone there. Children gathered in a circle as Jennings told stories about K-9 officers, tales of bravery, loyalty, and trust. When he finished, Ava shyly stood up and walked to Max, wrapping her arms around his neck. He keeps me safe, she told the crowd in a small, clear voice. Adults exchanged glances, some wiping tears. In that circle, surrounded by strangers and friends, the truth was undeniable. Protection isn't just about force, it's about heart. Months later, the case that had ignited the courtroom remained in legal limbo. The suspected suspects faced charges, but the focus had shifted from blame to healing. For the community, Max and Ava became symbols of resilience, living proof that justice wasn't just found in verdicts or headlines, but in moments of care and courage. And for Jennings, every time he looked at Max, he was reminded that the bond between a handler and his dog was sacred. It was built on trust, respect, and the unspoken promise to watch over each other, no matter what. One evening, Jennings sat on his porch, Max resting at his feet. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the kind of twilight that made the world feel both vast and intimate. Jennings reached down and scratched behind Max's ears. You're more than a K-9 partner, he said softly. You're family. You saved a little girl's life, and in doing so, you helped all of us believe in something better. Max looked up, eyes bright, and let out a quiet sigh. For a dog who never spoken a word, his message was clear. The job wasn't over. It never would be, because heroes don't retire, They just keep standing guard for the ones who need them most. And as long as Ava's voice echoed in the halls of justice, and Max's steady presence filled the lives he touched, the story would live on, a story of courage, of love, of the smallest voices making the loudest impact, a story that reminded everyone, no matter how young or how silent, that true protection comes from the heart.